tweets and things are out and should be out. Alright, here we go. This time for real, starting for real. Hi and welcome to the second dev stream for Winter's Wake. For anybody who's not tuned in before, I'm have spoilers, show spoilers sometimes. This one's going to be mostly spoiler free, but the warning's still going to be there. I usually try and load things or organize things in a way so that the spoiler type stuff is loaded towards the end of the stream, so that anybody who wants to come in and check the beginning can do so, and I'll certainly give people a heads up before I cover things that will be spoilery. Today we're going to look at a couple of topics. We're going to first look at the design of the poster that we came up with. People possibly have already seen that. The demo itself, and getting that out. The kind of feedback I've had on the demo, and then we're going to dive in and talk about the State Manager, which is the piece of the game engine that focuses on parsing puzzle definitions and handling the player actions and working out how we progress through the puzzles. So yeah, onto the poster design. I had a couple of goals for this. I really felt like something, because the game is not visually oriented. It's difficult to kind of nail down exactly what a very short and impactful visual representation should be. So I kind of felt like it should still be minimalistic and stylized, to just sort of make sure that it reflected that that kind of viewer imagined type thing that we've got going on in the game itself. So I kind of toyed with the idea of doing something in ASCII art. And I think I might. I was looking for an excuse to play with JP LeBreton's PlaySki tool, and this feels like could be a good match. I kind of was a little bit inspired by there's a sort of style of ink painting that's very minimalistic, called Sumier. I think that's a Japanese name for it. I also toyed with the idea of just like not having anything graphical, just like a flat color with some text on it. But it's tough, the game itself, when you're playing, you kind of accept that you're going to read things, and you accept that it's going to be different. But if you see like a poster that, or even when you visit the website, you go to the website and you're going there to find out about it. And so when the website is presented in a way that's the same as the game, you're moving to the website to find out about the game, so you accept that you're kind of a little bit in the game's world and you're a little bit in that domain. But when it comes to something promotional like a poster, usually that goes out into spaces that people aren't specifically looking for more information on the game, so having something that's accessible in that kind of context is kind of important. So they're kind of just a text thing that said, you see a poster for a game. I was like, I don't really feel like that's going to fly as well. But the idea of having something non-graphical or just an empty poster was kind of tempting for a little bit. Other thoughts I had were like wanting to sort of make sure that I was, in a minimalistic way, implying some of the setting and some of the context for the game. And I also want to make sure that I didn't have any characters or locations or key events in the game that were depicted through the poster, because I don't want to do anything that stomps on what players might imagine the game to be when they're actually playing. So going back to that Sumier style of, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I'm going to pretend that I am. This style of ink painting. It's kind of got this philosophy behind it that's all about making sure that every stroke has meaning, and in that way that does push it in the minimalist direction. So I don't know if this it's probably not a very good example, but I kind of like the way that the branch here in this little apple blossom illustration, it's each segment of the branch is made up from one stroke. And the shape and angle of that stroke kind of tells a bit of a story. Like it kind of is done in such a way that that it feels a little bit gnarled and it feels a little bit twisty and stuff, and it's kind of got a lot of character there. And so the philosophy behind it also kind of is geared towards capturing the spirit of the subject rather than the form of the subject. It's like a quote. I'm not sure who it's by, but it's something like, "When you paint the flower, try to paint the smell and the colors rather than the shape of the petals." You know, it's kind of cool. But yeah, it's a very deliberate type of style, and that sort of felt like it might be a good idea to go with. And I played around a little bit with some stuff along those lines. But first up, here's my like very first little sketch page with a couple of different ideas that I was trying out. Have I got my mouse cursor enabled? No. So I kind of was thinking maybe I could do something like with the negative space and the W's reflecting a mountain or something. I don't know. It didn't really go anywhere. But the one in the top right, the little scribble thing there, ended up feeling like it could be fun, like just a couple of snow-capped peaks. And it's a bit of an evolution as I kind of worked through trying to get this minimalist brushstroke feel going on. And then eventually I looked at the way that negative space was used in some depictions of mountains and stuff in this sort of that same kind of Japanese ink painting style. And felt that if I turned that from being negative space to being positive space for the poster, it kind of felt like it worked, and that's kind of what we ended up with. Which is it's neat. It's gonna need some refinement. It's just a sort of a quick mock-up, but it's nice to have something that I can put somewhere that starts to establish a visual identity for the game that the game kind of doesn't really have otherwise. So there's going to be a splash screen when you start up the game eventually that'll show something like this, and in that way tie it all together. But it is good to have something that fits the vocabulary, the visual kind of vocabulary that these kind of promotional type postery things need to have. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. And of course, earlier this month we pushed out the first demo, which is, in my eyes, very rough and awful, but it's great to have it out there. It was released to Patreon supporters on the 29th of July, and then to the public on the 2nd of August. It's up on IndieDB, itch.io, and Patreon at the moment for anybody who's keen to check it out, who hasn't already. If you just go to winterswake.com, there'll be links. I think I had around about 100 downloads in the first week. I also hosted it on one of my personal sites and gave that out in a couple of contexts as well, and so that's including those numbers. 100 feels good for something that is so not normal and difficult to describe and obviously niche. So 100 downloads in the first week, I feel really good about that. And as far as stats go, I don't have any stats from Patreon, so I have no idea how many people have downloaded it from that post, and that kind of is a bit of a shame, because that was the first place I put it up, and first place I tweeted about and all that sort of stuff, so it could be a lot higher than that, I don't know. But yeah, as far as like platform stats go, I'm looking about equal Windows and Mac, equal Windows and Linux, and a little bit less for Mac, which is kind of surprising. I was expecting that I would get a bit higher in the way of Mac numbers, but yeah, I mean the thing that this proves to me is that I know how to reach Linux users, and there are a lot of Windows users out there. That's the only thing that I'm drawing from these early stats. It'll be interesting, like from a starting point. This is interesting, and it's gonna be neat to see how these numbers evolve over time as the demo is refined and as more people hear about it and that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's kind of interesting, just for the moment, to see where it starts. So things that made it into the demo. We've got positional audio, which means that when you look around, you hear if something's to your left or to your right, and as you turn your head, you can hear that pan across your stereo or speakers or whatever. We've got background tinting, which we've seen in the first dev stream and other videos. We have a bunch of basic puzzles, which we're going to probably touch on a bit later. Action sounds, scene transition sounds, save load functionality, mouse and keyboard controls, and an analytics log. And the analytics log is neat because it tells me how long people have been looking at any given thing and the order that they look at stuff in, so I can sort of piece together the experience that people are having. If someone gets stuck and I find that they're, I don't know, waving the mouse around in frustration, that'll give a very specific type of pattern there. If I find that people keep going back to a scene, and then they tell me that, you know, they felt like they got stuck for a little while, then knowing where they go when they feel stuck, or knowing which locations make them feel stuck, is kind of helpful as well. So yeah, that sort of stuff. I've been asking people to email those into me. I haven't got as many as I was expecting, but you know, all that I've got is interesting, and it's all cool to learn from. Eventually, I want to like visualize that, and maybe have the game be able to parse that, and like so I can actually have the game play back their playthrough, which could be interesting. There are a bunch of things that didn't make it in. No head-mounted display support, so no Oculus Rift support or anything like that for now, but that's something I'll be working on moving forward. No gamepad support, no 32-bit builds. The UI is super temporary. The menu is terrible. I was hoping to get pagination in so that people could for long descriptions and stuff, people could advance to the next screen or whatever. But that'll come later. There's no ability to pause cutscenes. There's no ability to look at your inventory, and there's no kind of summary of your actions when you interact with something, which I was hoping to get in. And I also want to have like a volume configuration wizard where it would play a quiet sound and ask you to or play a loud sound and ask you to turn your volume up, and then play a quiet sound and ask you to enter or increase a value until that quiet sound was sort of audible, so that the game knew the acceptable range of volume and could adjust itself accordingly. Because I am still scared of blowing people's heads off with the waterfall scene. I had to make a bunch of supporting materials, like the poster that we talked about just earlier, banners and thumbnails and screenshots and walkthroughs and maps and stuff. They were being kind of fun to make. I made this little map thing, but I didn't end up shipping it with anything, so this is the first time anyone's seen it. These represents all of the locations in the demo, and they're kind of coloured based upon the scene colour that they have, so you kind of start in the avalanche on the left, and then move through the rest of the game. And so I don't know. I'm really kind of wary of this, because I've heard that people have... I'll get to that later. But yeah, so I eventually decided to not put this up, but I might do something down the track. Made a bunch of screenshots. It was tricky to know what... I mean, it looks... the game looks a lot more bland than it is when it's just a static screenshot. Like none of the background colors are changing, and there's no kind of indication of the kind of sensory feedback that the game gives you. But you can do what you can and hope that it's enough. I had to make assorted profile pictures and rejig the poster a bit to fit different aspect ratios and that sort of thing. It's always fun to play around. As far as feedback goes, things that players seem to like, and this is not comprehensive. This is sort of more of the commonalities between the different bits of feedback that I've received. So the intersection of things that seem to resonate with more people rather than few people, and it's just kind of my observations of the things that seem to be doing well. So people really like the positional audio, and it's just stereo, like it's pretty basic, but it really, a lot of people have commented on how it helps them feel grounded and helps them feel like the place is something that's around them, which is really cool. People seem to dig the action sounds. I was terrified because unfortunately we had one of our sound people have to step back from the project, and I ended up having to do a lot of the audio myself, and I'm not really comfortable in that sort of space, so I was terrified that it was all going to sound camp and stiff, but people seem to like it, so that's really reassuring. People love the color tinting, and all of the colors are temporary as well, but people respond to it, so that's really good. People like the writing. People enjoy the process of looking around and exploring the scenes. almost everybody I've talked to has commented positively on the music. And almost everybody I've talked to has said that they really like there are a couple of optional puzzles in the game that, in the demo, that they don't do anything, they don't progress anything, they're just an opportunity to do something if you want to do it. And for me, my goal behind putting them in there was I wanted to have something that would be, I don't know, would help players feel like they had an opportunity to be in control. Like if your possibility space is narrowed down to only the things that allow you to progress, then you have no opportunity for expressing yourself and as a player or as a person or as an imagined character. You have no ability to, I guess it comes down to that like determinism philosophy thing of whether or not you have control over your own life. And like if you give people the opportunity to do something outside of what is the obvious thing to do, and something that isn't necessarily connected to something that you have to do, then that lets people feel like they're in control. And so I feel like that's working, and I'm glad I put those in. Things that people had problems with or didn't seem to appreciate, the object alignment not aligning perfectly with the compass directions. This is intentional, because when somebody enters a new scene, I want to make sure that they're not facing an exit to another scene immediately. So I kind of like shifted everything around to offset it a little bit. And I also wanted to make it so that when it says you see something off to the north, that you start north and then look around and try and find it. But there were a few people who kind of wanted everything to be locked to those directions, which is an interesting thought. It's something that never really occurred to me. So I was kind of taking that on board and thinking about that, what I can do to make that feel more natural, whether that's down to rejigging the positions of things further or changing the descriptions, or whether it's just about making sure that I set the player expectations correctly at the beginning, so the players aren't expecting them to be aligned directly to the directions. Some people feel disoriented when exploring the scenes. It is tricky. There's a lot of feedback that ends up being conflicting, and I guess some of that starts to define people who appreciate the game and what it's trying to be from people who don't appreciate the game and what it's trying to be. There are some people who would prefer to not use the mouse to explore around the place. They'd rather just be able to press a button and cycle directly between the things that are in the scenes. And while that's not the game that I'm trying to make, that might be an option that I can add in fairly easily. And if that helps people enjoy the story or enjoy the content otherwise, then I guess I'd be okay adding that as an optional thing. I don't know. I'm going to have to play with it and see what works and what doesn't. Some people feel disoriented when moving between scenes, but most people commented on things like the particularly moving from the avalanche to the lake, or moving from the lake to the waterfall, where you've got a distant sound that gets louder as you get, as you move to a scene that's closer to the source of that sound. That sort of stuff seems to help people avoid feeling disoriented when moving between scenes. So that's stuff that I want to kind of fixate a little bit more on and make sure that I'm doing that, because at the moment there's not a lot of that once you move out of the forest in the demo. People commented on the lack of an inventory screen and a lack of feedback when saving and a lack of in-game settings, and I guess I'm going to say that people didn't like that it was short, but I've had a lot of people saying that they wished that it was longer, or they wish that there was more to see, and that they're looking forward to seeing the full game. So, some people do seem a little bit disappointed that it's not longer, but I take that as enthusiasm for the game rather than any real direct criticism. As far as the lack of inventory screen and settings and stuff, that's all on the roadmap. That's all coming, so that's all good. Some people have accidentally skipped cutscenes, and that's another thing about feeling disoriented when moving around. Some people get a bit click happy, and I never really expected that. It might be a kind of a idle thing that people do while thinking is just to tap the mouse button or something. It's just never occurred to me that people would get click happy and wind up moving to a scene or doing an action without knowing what they were doing. So kind of want to do more to make it so that you get more feedback on the actions that you perform and the places that you're going, so that if you do something accidentally, you get some feedback and know what it was. And to make it a little bit harder to do that. So things like meaning that you can't move to a new scene before the description for the exit is faded in, and that sort of stuff. I've had some suggestions from people. Oh, there's an alarm. That's nice. Some people have suggested narration, and while I think that narration would be really cool for games like this, it's definitely at odds with what my goals are for this game. I feel like anything that would have an actor's performance layered above... I mean, it would stomp on the music and the ambient audio and stuff, but mostly I don't really want a narrator's performance to kind of flavour the way that players are interpreting the text. Like if someone wants to read something one way, they can. If somebody wants to read it another way, they can, and both are, to me, valid. But if there's narration, there's so much nuance that comes through the speaking style that people have, or that a narrator would have, and even if they just play it straight and flat and as emotionless as possible, there's still going to be something there. I want to add support for screen readers so that sight-impaired people can still experience it, but I think that, letting, in those cases, using the existing tools for that sort of thing that people use is going to be better than having something in-game that risks, flavouring the interpretation that people come up with. A few people have suggested alternative compass implementations, and I've always wanted to explore a bit more and poke around with other options. I did do some early prototypes with like some 3D in-scene compasses that so when you look around, say like something on the floor, I guess, and so when you look around you can see the compass points as you turn, but when you look up they kind of disappear below, and that is a bit of a cue for whether you're looking up or down as well. So I might play around with a bit of that and give people the opportunity to play things and give some feedback on those things as well. We'll see where that stuff goes. Some people have asked for persistence of discovered objects, like on the compass, or maybe on the sides of the screen or something, so that for things that they've already found, that they can return to them easily. And while for me a lot of the game is about remembering where things are and building that sense of spatial relationships in your head, like I said before, that could be an option that I could add in to make the game more accessible to people who aren't interested in the core experience. So, again, things to play around with and things to experiment with. And I mentioned the whole kind of a couple of people asking for the ability to just jump to stuff. I did have one person say that they wished that it just had a normal text adventure interface, which I thought was really interesting. I don't think I really covered any of that in the slides, but it's kind of interesting to see. Oh no, I do. So my favorite observations. I completely forgot that I had this slide in here. So like I mentioned before, some people have drawn out their own maps, and I love the hell out of that. That is like the most gratifying piece of feedback I've heard, is that people got excited enough to start sketching out their own interpretations of the spaces. That's really cool. I had a player ask me for like concept art and stuff because they wanted to do some fan art based on some of the characters and locations. That's also pretty cool. Different people I found, looking at the logs and talking to people, different people fixate on different details in or different locations or different characters or whatever it is that they're looking at. People fixate on these things of different. People fixate on different things and flag them as being more prominent than other things. So a lot of people, like the waterfall is the big thing for them, and for some people, A spoiler alert, I guess. When you find the healer's a big thing for them. And for some people, like, just hanging out at the lake is cool, or for other people, it's the forest. But, like, what this says to me is, like, people are sort of saying that these are the centerpieces of the game, I guess. But what this says to me is that each of these people who fixates on these different things, they're having different experiences from each other, in ways that they possibly couldn't have with a game that more rigidly defined everything. So I love that people are having their own experiences. That's kind of part of what this is all about. It's about allowing people to imagine in their own minds what is important and what isn't important, and kind of work it out from there. So that's really cool. People seem to linger in scenes that have soundscapes that they appreciate. I was not really expecting that to happen, but some people just dig being in a place and go back there to think when they're not sure what to do. So that's kind of cool. The next 2 points are related. So people with experiences with first-person games don't mind the controls very much, but seem to, not everybody. This is just again based on commonalities, but people who have a lot of experience with first-person games seem to find the controls okay, but don't have as easy a time keeping track of the spatial relationships between everything, and keeping track of orientation and where things are. But players who are familiar with, like, text adventure games find the controls hard, but seem to be better equipped for that kind of keeping track of where things are in the game and where things are in the scene. So I found that really, really interesting. Not something I was expecting, but in hindsight, it kind of makes a lot of sense. I did have one player who had more familiarity with text adventures, I guess, who said that they would rather just have a normal text parser than use a mouse and keyboard, which is fair and valid, I guess, but not the direction I'm going with the game. And yeah, like I said, people seem interested and want to learn more about the story, so that's great. That's good news. So yeah, moving on to, like, development stuff. The State Manager. What is the State Manager? The idea is that after talking to other people who make adventure games, I found that there's this kind of problem that some people get into when taking an object-oriented approach to designing adventure games, is that they kind of go, okay, well, the door's an object and it's got it needs a key, so it has a locked property and all this other stuff, and you end up like building a lot of in-world object logic. When and sort of the problem that I see people encountering there is that everything's fine until they go back and start to rework and refine and fix bugs and stuff in their games. And so you may have this very complex chain of logic that involves 6 or 7 different objects in the game. But then later on you decide you want to change the order of the puzzle or something, or you need to you pull one object out because you don't feel like it's working well with the game, but you've got 3 puzzles that all intersect on that object, and it's just like it's easy for things to kind of fall through the gaps because you don't have like this kind of centralized, unified vision of the puzzle flow and what the puzzle stuff's all about. So I sort of felt that for me, rather than modeling the world and the world objects, the things that I wanted to model from an object-oriented design perspective, like the objects that I want to model are puzzles and tasks and player actions, not and like the in-game representations of objects are mostly down to what the renderer shows, the text descriptions and the sounds that get played. Like the puzzle logic is kind of separate from that to me in my mind. And having all that centralized kind of means that all the logic runs through the same code, all the checks are done by the same bits and pieces, so if I have a bug in my state manager, then that affects every puzzle, but fixing it fixes every puzzle, rather than having little bits and pieces that could slip through the cracks and come back and cause me headaches later. So the goals that I have for the state manager are that it should load the puzzle definitions, it should handle like saving and loading the game state as well. It centralizes all of that state tracking for the puzzles. It manages the object states at runtime. It listens to the user interactions, or rather when I have an input manager, the input manager will pass things off to the state manager to deal with based on user actions. It also will validate the game states. So if it loads a save game and it goes, hey, like, you've got save states for these things that don't exist in the game anymore, let's flag this as a problem. Or you've completed this puzzle that's not possible to complete without completing this other puzzle, something's wrong here. And also validate puzzle definitions, so if there's a cyclic puzzle that you can't break into because it depends on itself or something, I'd like to be able to flag that, have that flagged by the engine rather than rely on testing to reveal that. This is a really rough look at the kind of component interaction that I've got designed for the engine. So the init, the game initialization loads, asks a resource loader to load the game config, and then once all that's loaded, it would initialize the state manager, but I don't have that there. It passes everything off to the game loop, and the game loop kind of goes, alright, input handler, has there been any input from the user? And if there has, then we pass it off to the state manager, which updates all the objects based on the user interaction, and then, hey, how's it going? And then, if we're moving to new scenes, then the resource loader will load more scenes, and stuff as well. So that's all cool and good, and mostly not confusing at all. It's confusing. So what is a puzzle? To me, a puzzle, for this game at least, a puzzle is a sequential list of tasks. So it's ordered, and the ordering is important. A puzzle is complete when all of its tasks are completed. A puzzle may have 0 or more dependencies on other puzzles, and this is where we start to be able to chain together the logic and force have gating and progression through the game. The puzzle's dependencies might include logical operators for so a puzzle may be dependent on this puzzle and this puzzle being finished, or it may be dependent on this puzzle or this puzzle being finished, and in that way I can have non-linearity and exclusivity of paths through the game and that sort of stuff. What is a task? A task is like a specific user action, so when you press use on a specific object, that's really all it is. And so a task gives or removes an inventory item if it's related. So we'll go through an example puzzle in a sec. Here's what a puzzle looks like at the moment in the game. This is what ships with the game. There's a puzzle. It's called Open Village Gates. It requires the Get Stones puzzle to be completed. It has 3 tasks. It has 2 tasks. The first task is to use the bell tower at the gates, and the second task is to use the exit at the gates. And the first task updates the description of a couple of bits and pieces so that it all behaves. So here we see the same puzzle with a little bit more context. We've got the Get Stones puzzle, which has 1 task, which is to use the Pebble Shore. Hang on, spoilers again. I'm not very good at giving spoiler warnings. So we use a Pebble Shore, and that gives us the stones. Giving the stones is a cosmetic thing. I mean, we tell that to the player because they expect that that's what it is, like in the narrative, that's what happens. But as far as the puzzle logic goes, we don't really care whether or not they've got inventory items, so long as they've used things in the right order. So you use a Pebble Shore first, and that completes the Get Stones puzzle, which allows you to progress onto the Village Gates puzzle, and then you use a bell tower to initiate that puzzle and go into its list of tasks. And of course, there's for the stones, there's another optional puzzle that you can do that's also requires the get stones puzzle be finished. When you're using an object, it checks to see whether or not the object used matches the current task of any in-progress puzzles or the first task of any not started puzzles. So we loop through all the puzzles that we've got, and any that are in progress, we say the current task of that, does that match the action that's just been performed? And if it does, then we consider that to be a valid user action, and we progress that puzzle forward. We also continue looking through the rest to see if there are any more, so one action can progress multiple puzzles forward, which is cool. It updates the states of relevant objects, so it's like updating the descriptions and the icons and then sounds if they have sounds and that sort of stuff. So for example, again, to use something that's in the demo, when you use the bell tower, if you've already done the get stones puzzle, it updates the description of the bell tower and the action icon, like it removes the action icon and updates the description to say that you've already thrown the stone, and it updates the gates to say that you can go through now. We set the puzzle to complete if it's the last task in the puzzle, and then we set the, or if it's not, we set the next task as the current task for the puzzle. And that allows us to just, keep track. At any time we can find out what state any puzzle is in. Says, again, if we use the Pebble Shore, then that updates the bell tower and the lake to have the appropriate action icons. It gives a stones inventory item. At the moment, as I said before, I don't have an inventory screen, so you don't get to view that, but yeah. It removes the action icon from the Pebble Shore, so you can't pick up, you can't feel like you can pick up stones anymore. It updates the Bell Tower, Lake, and Village Gate descriptions to hint at being able to use the stones, and updates their action icons to show that you can do that as well. And it sets the Get Stones puzzles complete flag to true. Then if you use the Bell Tower, then it checks to make sure that the Get Stones puzzle is complete. It updates the Village Gate with appropriate action icon to say that we can move through it. It removes the action icon from the bell tower because we don't need to throw any more stones in it. It updates the bell tower and the village gate descriptions to show that the gate is now usable, and then advances the village gate's puzzle to the second task. Using the village gate sets the village gate's puzzle to complete because it's the last task in the puzzle. I hope that kind of made some sense. Let's go back. Because this is really, really kind of the core of how the puzzles work. That it is really just a sequence of player actions in a particular order with the cosmetic flavor of the setting and the narrative thrown on over top. And keeping it that simple, this would be a lot more complex if it wasn't single verb and if it wasn't a game where you automatically used inventory items, but it's not a big step in complexity from the code perspective to add that stuff in. It's just a couple more checks along the way, and I feel like this is going to save me a lot of hassle in the long run. And I'm kind of glad that I went this way. So going back to that earlier diagram that I showed, let's flip all the way back. This one, to give a bit of a look, use case statement for how, not use case. This is what we call a state machine diagram. Kids may call this something else these days. I don't keep track of what the current buzzwords are, but the idea is that we have a use case, which in this case is case. In this instance, our use case is that we're starting the game and using an object. So the game initialization. So that the idea is that all of the vertical lines represent objects, and all of the horizontal lines represent functions that allow those objects to interact with each other. So the first thing we do is the game initialization loads a configuration, it gets a resource loader to load the configuration. So it will be a load config function of the resource loader, and then that returns back to the init function. The init function then calls a state manager to initialize it. And the state manager asks the resource loader to load all the puzzles for it, and then we go back to the initialization thing, which sets the game running. And then the game loop kind of goes through and does its scene, its thing. It loads the current scene because current scene hasn't been loaded yet. And then it polls for input. Once we have input from the user, it'll go back, and then the game loop will call the state manager. We'll call the use object function to see whether or not it's related to any tasks, and then kind of go back to the middle. And then those last two actions of polling input and using objects when the player does stuff, that's pretty much the entire game. So that's cool. The initial implementation of the state manager loads puzzles from files. It can load a save state from file. It can save a state to file. It walks through all of the puzzles in the game until they match the current state that's in a save file. So the save file consists of key value pairs. It's pretty simple. It's just the name of like a list of names of all of the completed puzzles, and so we walk through all of the steps of the completed puzzles, doing each one one at a time, so that we can be sure that the game is in the same state that it was when the player left. So rather than just setting everything to true or false or whatever number it's meant to be, we actually walk through all of the individual things. So the game kind of plays itself out in the background. And it feels like that's a more robust way of doing that. It doesn't have a high overhead because the game's pretty simple, but yeah. It caches new object states when actions happen. So there's this little cache thing that says it's basically a map between the name of an object and the state index that it's at. And when you use an object, it updates that map. And when we load a scene, we kind of get the descriptions for the objects, and then we ask that cache, what is the current state for this object? But for anything that's in the current scene that we're in, we just kind of set that at the time as well. And then, for future improvement stuff, I don't know, I'm toying with the idea of implementing it with a what we call a singleton model, which means that there can only be one state manager. I can't think of any times that I would like to have two state managers, and since I'd like other people to be able to use the engine, I don't think I want to risk them being able to have two state managers, so a singleton type thing will be possibly beneficial there. And that'll mean that no matter where you are, no matter what context you're in, if you say, hey, I need a state manager, you'll always get the right one. At the moment, it only loads puzzles from one file, and I want to make it support multiple files. I want to have a better handling of logical dependency constraints, so at the moment, I can't mix up the logical dependency stuff, so it's either all of them are AND, or all of them are NOR, or all of them are not, or whatever, I can't mix up. I can't say puzzle A and puzzle B, but not puzzle C. To do that at the moment, I've got to have a stack of sort of placeholder puzzles that don't have any tasks, or that have the same completion that it's got to work through, and that's icky. So I've got to write some kind of expression parsing thing to be able to handle that. I want to have these kind of milestone states maybe, which will be sort of shortcuts. I don't know if I want to do this. This kind of would undermine that whole kind of walking through the saved state to make sure and guarantee that the game is in a particular state. But the idea would be that, say I've got the game's in 3 acts, and there are sort of these, at the beginning of end of each act, we kind of do bring things back down, and remove all the non-linearity and remove all the optional paths and stuff. And I thought maybe the idea of having that as a point from which we can calculate the new state from. So if we say, alright, well, we finished Act 1, we don't care about any of the puzzles from that, we can just assume that the entire game is in this particular state and walk through the Act 2 puzzles that are relevant. But like I say, I don't know if I want to do that, because it does kind of start to introduce some of that risk of, if I have to keep the milestone stuff maintained alongside all of the puzzles themselves, and I'd rather just kind of have everything calculated off the puzzles directly. I want to do a thing that visualizes puzzle structure, so to create the puzzle dependency charts that were in the first dev stream. that would be really cool. And at the moment, it doesn't do any of the kind of validation stuff very well, so I want to improve that. The current development focus for the game moving forward, the engine's called Icicle, for anybody who hasn't heard, by the way. I didn't have a picture here of the logo thing that I made for it, but I'll show that off at some point in the future. I'm going to refactor its approach to managing and storing in-scene objects. That's like a big thing. That stuff was all temporary, and it was done temporary to allow me to move forward with developing the rest of the game quickly and developing the rest of the ideas that the game uses quickly. And now it's kind of time for me to refactor that stuff and make it more robust and more usable for things that I'm not doing yet. I want to add in head-mounted display and gamepad support. I've started to automate my build processes. I've got a build server up that is going to make it do nightly builds and stuff. But now that I'm not building it on my desktop, I can start setting up a proper build environment. And configuring 32-bit builds is a bit of a priority there as well. I feel kind of bad that people who don't have 64-bit systems are sort of a little bit left in the dark. But we'll get that sorted. I want to add in rough content for the rest of the game so that Anton can start composing music or can start messing around with audio and stuff. And as I go through and refine the engine, I want to make sure that those fixes are going down to the demo so that I can get feedback on how well they're working and people who play the demo can get a better experience. So yeah, that's about it. How long did we go? About an hour. I was aiming for half an hour, so that's great. That's only twice as long, not 3 times as long like the first one. But yeah, thanks very much for watching. It was a little bit dry towards the end there, sorry about that. If you're after more information, you can go to winterswake.com, check out some details on the game. You can also grab the demo. And I think I've typed out the URL wrong there, but whoops. Definitely just go to winterswake.com and follow the links there. That's a much better idea. And if you're excited about the idea of supporting development, you can visit patreon.com/cheeseness. One other thing that I do want to touch on, and totally I had the opportunity and didn't, was I mentioned that Jasmine, who was in the previous dev stream, has stepped back from her role as a sound person. We are using some of her recordings and some of her work in the demo, so that's really cool. But I did bring another person on to assist with sound stuff, and I definitely want to make sure that she's recognized. So Caroline Chung is mentioned there in the credits as being assisting with temporary sound design, and it's been a great pleasure to have her assisting. It's a little bit daunting to do it on my own and do all the kind of get the demo programming done on my own, so I definitely appreciate the help. But yeah, so stay tuned. Next dev stream is probably going to talk about scene design and how to think about the colors and descriptions and stuff. Right now, as I said, a lot of that stuff is temporary, so I'm going to be talking about the workflows that I'm going to be using to refine those into more permanent assets, I guess. So yeah, if that's interesting, check that out. If you haven't played the demo, grab the demo. If you think it's interesting, tell people about it. That would be awesome. If it's tricky. If you've got any ideas, I would love to hear how people describe the game. That's probably the most interesting thing to me right now. Because I find that I have a lot of trouble describing it. I call it a first-person text-adventure hybrid. But I do feel that all that does is make people go, oh, I don't want to play a first-person text-adventure hybrid. Not, what is that? Which is more the type of response that I want to elicit. But yeah, so if anybody has any exciting ideas about how to describe it, feel free to share those. But yeah, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Let's play some music. Hooray!